Good morning, members. Welcome to this meeting of the Audit, Risk and Scrutiny Committee. The meeting is being live streamed and recorded and will be made available for viewing through our council website. Remote participants, please follow the good practice guidance, which includes muting microphones and switching off your video when you're not addressing the meeting. Writing speak in the Teams chat function when you want to contribute. If you're in the hall, you can do this on your iPhone or iPad. Please don't repeat contributions already made by other members. No material should be posted in the chat function if it's intended as part of the discussion. Usual standing orders apply, including that any votes will be undertaken by roll call. If any member has to leave the meeting, please either leave the Teams meeting for that period of time or write leave in the Teams chat function and then join when you rejoin the meeting so we can keep track on whether the meeting is quorate. All members should speak clearly, taking their time and speaking directly into the microphone when making contributions. When referring to reports, please provide reference to the relevant page and paragraph to allow everyone to follow. Please focus contributions on areas where clarification is required or to propose an alternative to a recommendation. So, on to the sederant and apologies. Claire, could you please provide the sederant and any apologies?
Thank you, Chair. We've currently got 12 members present. I've been advised of 2 apologies this morning from Councillors Johnston and McGregor. 2 members present in the hall, being yourself and Councillor Beretti. 1 member currently not present, being Councillor Giusti. Remaining 10 members all present on Teams. Thank you.
Thank you, Claire. I approve of members' remote participation. Item 2 is declarations of interest. Do any members have a declaration of interest or a statement of connection they wish to make? Councillor Drybra, Vice Chair.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Not so much either. Actually, just the NHS internet access, so sometimes it falls down. I'll need to jump onto my phone and get the 4G just in case something happens with that, okay?
Yeah, well, that's fine, Councillor Drybra, thanks for letting us know. So if we go on to then the minutes of the previous meeting of the 13th of June 2024, can we approve those those minutes as they are? Okay, thank you, members. Item 4 is Audit Scotland report, best value, thematic work, report by Director Enabling and Customer Services. Heather Carnahan, Simon Fieldhouse, James McDowell and Mo Agoon are here to assist if members have any questions, all available online, I think. So initially, I think, Heather, you've appeared. Is there anything you'd like to add to the report, or any of the authors like to add to the report before opening up to members?
Oh, we're happy just to go straight to questions, thank you.
Okay, thank you. So, Councillor Beretti.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Thank you for the report. In relation to page 13 and best value, and it's to do with climate change target, which you have on page 14, 4.4. What progress has been made to fulfil the commitment made at the last full council to review the cross-party climate group?
Thanks. I'm just looking to see if we have Simon with us. Simon is on standby. Simon, are you? Yeah, yeah. Thank you.
Thank you, Heather, and through yourself, Chair. Thank you, Councillor Beretti, for the question. I mean, obviously, we've taken the report back to full council, so we've revised the targets. We are obviously looking at the opportunities internally for how we might revise and refresh the cross-party sort of members group. We have obviously sort of with the new structure a new executive director in place who I believe will be coming along to the next meeting, and obviously we're able to look at the opportunities that we have there for how we might re-profile and revise that group to ensure obviously the effectiveness and the opportunity for them to support the movement for the council. So it is in place, but we are awaiting the next meeting of the cross-party working group to bring obviously the new executive director into place.
Okay, thank you, Simon. Tony, Councillor Beretti, do you want to come back on that one?
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Chair. No, thank you, Simon. I look forward to seeing it, and obviously with the new directorate and how it may go forward. I have another question, but I'll let other members come in first.
Okay, thank you. So firstly, we have Councillor Scobie.
Thanks, Chair. Just reference 4.6 monitoring of capital projects. And when I look at the narrative on page 19, I think it's crucial or to enable members to follow progress that's being made, that everything is on time, to make sure that everything is going as planned. There should be a timeline for all these projects, these capital projects. I'll give you an example, and that's the George Hotel, where I've been asking for a timeline on the project for donkeys now. I don't know how many times I've asked for a timeline, but with no success. But yet, almost a monthly report, as I understand it, is made to a project board. And I would assume that's on progress being made in the George Hotel. I'm finding more things on Facebook in terms of the George Hotel, and that's people taking photo shots and putting it on Facebook. I think it's crucial, and I only reference that, give that as an example. I think it's crucial for members to have a timeline on capital projects so that they can monitor the progress being made, and if there is any slippage on the project. Just wondering what the views of other members are.
Thanks, Councillor Scobie. So I think all members are probably aware now of the new, I suppose, gateway approach to capital programme, which has done the rounds at committees, etc., and probably at political groups. Presumably new projects will be following that course, and then legacy projects will be sort of retrofitted into that, is what I'm imagining. But if I can maybe pass over, well, initially Vlad in the first instance, because I think you've certainly spoke to this in the past.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Councillor Scobie. Yeah, I think that if we look at page 19, that I think that confirms what Councillor Scobie is alluding to, is to have more of that, because it states very clearly within 4 reports to members on the capital programme show cost information general narrative, but there's no reporting plan, project completion timelines. So that is already been implemented, and as is stated in the update of actions, the capital monitoring reports will now have some of that timeline within since August 2023. So I'm hoping that's now translating, but alongside the gateway process that will be that is being implemented, and obviously we are carrying out through the Rossell review what that looks like in terms of the relevant schema delegations, both from officers and also the relevant committees. All of that being thrashed out will in essence have the rightful reporting through those processes to the relevant committee as and when for these projects. So I can give that assurance to Councillor Scobie that we're already doing some of it, but that will be finally refined in terms of the Rossell work that we're carrying out with schema delegations for that gateway process.
Thanks, Vlad. I'm just sort of wondering in terms of specifically the George Hotel, because obviously this has had a lot of attention focused on it, but that sort of local update for ward members, obviously there's projects in specific wards that have a key relevance to local members, and there've maybe been assurances in the past around, for example, flood schemes or capital projects where there'd be regular updates. Do we have any assurance on that? And maybe that's the aspect, correct me if I'm wrong, Councillor Scobie, that's really been sought here.
Yeah, you're perfectly correct, Chair, and I hope that on the assurance that Vlad's given that we will see that in the George Hotel as a specific. While I exampled it, I would look for that to be the case. Up to now, it's not been the case.
Thank through yourself, Chair. I think we can maybe take an action in terms of ensuring that specifically for that one, because that's a very clear request for the timeline on that, and I'll maybe just allude to the overall area committee review that we're also carrying out, and that might also be another avenue for these type of requests when they come through, so that they are discussed and scrutinised at the local level.
That's certainly helpful, I think. Councillor Hagman.
Good morning. Thank you, Chair. Yeah, so this is a historical report that we're looking at, which is useful. But my question relates to how can we tie in some of this information as we go forward? So I'm looking specifically at the local government benchmark framework, which I know certainly I've raised in all our service committees when we've looked at the indicators coming forward and how we can actually ensure that we have an understanding of what this actually means. So we might, have the figures, but we don't necessarily have the comparison. And, looking on page 21, it did, state that we hadn't we haven't produced the reports, but those have actually now been completed. So, I have looked back at my emails, and yes, we got an email at the beginning of March with a link to the Improvement Service website with various reports. I will fully admit, having downloaded the sort of data pack, it's near impossible to actually understand what it means and what relevance this is. So I'm just wondering, I mean, this is an update on actions and it has got complete, but is there further work that the team are doing on an ongoing basis? Because if we're looking at the local government benchmarking framework indicators, which we legally have to pull together, how do we give that meaning going forward? So just to say that we've completed that, elected members got an email back in March, we're all done, to me only tells half the story. Will we get a report back in future? Is that a separate piece of work? So a few questions there, Chair, and I'll let whoever's appropriate to come in on that. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Hagman. I can see Heather nodding eagerly, so over to you, Heather.
Yeah, thanks very much. Thanks for your questions there, Councillor Hagman, as well. It's a subject that's been close to my heart for I think 15 years now. We've had the local government benchmarking framework in existence. And yes, absolutely, we do. It's embedded within service plans. So what's just been going through committees recently is the service plan, which you're absolutely right, that doesn't present the data or the comparisons. That's just giving you assurance that LGBF indicators are embedded within each service plan. And then so through our performance reporting reports that come into committee on a 6-monthly and then the end of year performance report, you'll get the data and the trend data that allows you to see those comparisons and how we perform relative to others. I think it's worth remembering as well that the LGBF data is always, there's a year's lag on it. So, you're not looking at the live data, it's always a year's lag. So that does come through. Jane Howitt, who I'm sure quite a few of you will be familiar with within my team, is actually currently working on the latest release of data. So what we do so is that you get, you get a briefing on our performance year on year and also our performance compared to the family groups. We take that out of the very complicated framework, as you say, that's there, because there's a plethora of information. We extract that for you, show how our performance has been over time. We always look at it we give you the last 4 years worth of data, so as you can see trends and changes within it, and you see our performance and also the performance of the family group. What we also do beside that is the services provide a little bit of narrative that gives you a feeling for what they're doing around that performance. Sometimes our performance has got a bit better, sometimes our performance may, compared to others, have dropped. So they give you some narrative to let them know what they're doing around the performance. So the latest briefing is on the website. It was circulated with members, but the new one is just being worked on as we speak. Indeed, I had a meeting with Jane just earlier this morning, and she's doing a fresh cut of the new data that's just dropped. So, and again, you're absolutely right, that's on an ongoing basis. So whilst that action's complete, that was to pick up on some of during COVID, there was a distraction, not just by us, but in councils across the country. There was a bit of a distraction from the routine of LGBF reporting. So the action was around us getting those disciplines back in place. So just to give you the assurance that they absolutely are back in place, and those briefings have been reinstated, and very shortly you'll see the latest one.
Thanks, Heather. Councillor Hagman, does that answer your questions?
It does, and certainly the improvement service has got a huge amount of data on there. And you know, I'm really well aware members' diaries and officers' diaries are very compressed. So to request yet another seminar on this might not be appropriate. But are we aware if the improvement service are running any seminars, or can we request that from the improvement service? Because I'm having a look, and there's, you know, performance overview from local authority. It's got performance indicators. I can see lots of red lines which are going downwards, which I'm thinking is not good, but I don't really know or understand how to navigate the improvement service's website so I can get an indication. So if it's not appropriate for us to do some training and seminar, can that request go to the improvement service? Because actually, you know, if we're gathering this data, we're doing all this work and we're pulling all this, we need to know what the relevance is to us as a local authority and how we can actually best improve. So if that request can go back, that would be useful. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Councillor Hagman. So, Heather, is that something that we can explore further?
Yes, absolutely, Chair and Councillor Hagman, we most definitely can. I'd certainly be happy to do something. We have done it in the past. We've had member seminars, and the tool, as Councillor Hagman says, has been developed brilliantly in recent times. So we can certainly look at delivering a joint seminar with the Improvement Service. We work closely with Emily, who's the programme manager for the benchmarking framework. We could deliver a joint framework, a joint briefing member seminar with you, no bother at all.
That's great. We'll pick that up as an action as we go forward. Thank you. So, Councillor Marshall.
Yeah, I think similar to Katie's question, it was just with regards to the LG BF performance. I think in 4.3 it kind of just, you know, confirms that it's been updated, the website, but it also mentions about the arrangements that are in place for future self-assessments, and there's a number of self-assessments that'll be taking place in the end of 2024 and into 2025. I'm just wondering, how will that information be forwarded to, so as each self-assessment is complete, will there be a link sent to members? I'm just wondering how we'll be able to get that information.
Yeah, thanks, Councillor Marshall. I mean, when I was reading the papers, I'm aware that this was maybe given a bit more of a closer look by the budget panel, which of course isn't a decision-making forum, and it's only some elected members would attend that, even if others had been sent a link. So there is maybe something about how that cascades through to all elected members more proactively. So Heather, I don't know if you want to touch on that a little bit.
Yes, no problem at all, thanks. So for self-assessments, the programme of self-assessments that we have scheduled is linked to the Chief Executive's evaluation of the new operational arrangements that were approved by members and have been implemented. So we've carried out a corporate baseline self-assessment, and towards the end of this year we'll be doing the new assessment of at the corporate level assessment, which will be followed by, as it says in the report, a programme of service reviews which will be carried out at head of service level. In terms of sharing those, so they will primarily form the report back to full council on the re-evaluation of the operational arrangements, and we will, as it says there will be links to those on the website, but we can certainly, in advance of them going on the website, ensure that the outputs from the self-evaluation are shared with elected members.
Yeah, thanks. And just Chair, if you allow me, just on your point there as well, I also had identified at page 21 as well that I do believe as well that the information that's been submitted to the budget panel should be shared wider amongst the elected members. So I don't know if there's anything in hand to do that.
Yeah, thanks, Councillor Marshall, and I think that seems to be the assurance that Heather's trying to give in terms of what we do in future based on the new way of working. But yeah, I absolutely think that all members should have ready access to that and not just through the budget panel in the first instance. There is another point that's come up at a number of committees recently, which is about, I suppose, how benchmarking information helps provide context to live information within years, so if, whether it's education, skills and well-being or economy and infrastructure, where a report alludes to performance over performance reporting, sometimes that contextual information in terms of where we are with our family benchmark group might be helpful as well. And certainly it's been picked up in a number of committees recently. So does that cascade through our reporting at committee as well as just the sort of corporate dashboard, if you like? And maybe that's a question for yourself, Heather, if you can maybe help with that one. Thank you.
No problem, Chair, and it absolutely does. I think the thing we need to remember with the LGBF indicators are, so whilst, as I said earlier, there's a year's lag, if you like, on that data, it is our data. We return that information on a more real-time basis to professional associations who track the performance of such things. So in terms of in-year data, absolutely that is available. For the majority of indicators, there are a few that are annual only, but that's, you know, that's well stated within the service plans. The frequency of reporting's captured there. So where they are in year, then yes, absolutely, they should be featuring within service plans, and we can do some closer monitoring of that and ensure that they are.
That's helpful, thank you. So Councillor Beretti, you indicated earlier that you may want to come back in. I don't know if your question's been covered, but over to you.
No, Chair. Councillor Hagman covered some of the points I wanted to know, so there's no point. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay, well, I don't see any other hands up, so thanks everybody for their input on that one. Are we happy to go to the recommendations then? And we've considered and basically note the progress on the Dumfries and Galloway Council Best Value Action Plan as detailed, and we've also picked up a couple of actions in relation to a bit more information on the George Hotel specifically, and exploring the seminar with the improvement service. If we're happy to do that, members? Yep. Okay, thank you. So that takes us on to the item 5, Annual Complaints Monitoring Report 2023-24. I think we have Nick Evans online. He's just appeared on the screen to assist if members have any questions. Nick, is there anything you'd like to add to the report before we open it up to members?
No, thank you, Chair. Happy to respond to questions.
Thank you. So, Councillor Dryborough first.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Obviously, this year another increase in complaints, and the reason for that is, you know, there is many ways in which the members of the public can complain. I think, you know, what I've said this before, there's hundreds of thousands of interactions with the council in the different departments throughout the year, and you know, to have 631 one complaint is too many. But in the main, I think, you know, it's a relatively low number compared to what has been seen elsewhere in Scotland. However, I have read the report, and you know, what I've seen in pages, just a second, page 40 is the learning from complaints, and this is, you know, looking at the different departments, things like that. I just want to know is how do we actually get that information back to perhaps the individual who has been complained about, or the department? Because this is really, you know, where there's been a challenge, there's been a review of staff training, etc. There's direct work with the staff to remind them to check the contact, all of that type of things. But who does that, and who makes sure that actually happens? Because normally it would be your team leader, but you also have your department head who would hopefully try to ensure that happens as well.
Thanks, Councillor Driver. So is that almost asking, not only is there a corporate learning response, but some feedback to the original complainant as well in terms of what lessons have been learned? Or
Absolutely.
Yep. Thank you. Okay, so Nick, can you help Councillor Driver with that?
I think certainly in terms of the learning as an organisation, we try to take from complaints is in providing feedback to the services, and where necessary, as Councillor Driver has already mentioned, it would be team leaders and or heads of service in in certain circumstances, feeding back to teams and looking at where processes can be enhanced or procedures revised to ensure that we do take learning from the complaints. We do as an organisation need to get better in terms of driving that round the organisation, because it may well we may be effective in making the changes within the relevant departments, but we need to, and as a team we're looking at how we get better about sharing that learning across the council as a whole, rather than it being sort of parochial, if you like.
Thanks, Nick.
And,
I think
about sorry, Chair, and just on the complainer getting feedback.
yeah. So I think Vlad was going to come in at this point. Is that correct, Vlad?
Yes, thank you through yourself, Chair. Yeah, just to agree with Nick, and that's certainly one conversation that we've had in terms of how do we improve alongside the corporate and that muscle memory of learning from lessons learned in specific complaints, and having that kind of pattern looked at and spotted and then thereafter addressed. So that's the kind of strategic point, and I think Councillor Driver brings up a really good point in terms of how do we go back to the relevant complainer and in essence provide them with that assurance. And we've got that process already laid out in terms of our overall complaints process, and we often do that. So for example, in the stage 2 investigations, where we take it to that level of the complaint, that's properly investigated, and that's something that when we're responding to that, we will obviously accept at times if there are any issues from our end, and obviously we give that assurance that that's been addressed, and obviously provide the relevant apology as required depending on what that complaint relates to. So there is ways for that. Obviously the kind of stage 1 or level 1 complaints, we try and address things at source as best we can, and again giving that assurance to the member of the public who's complaining is really important at that stage of that. So complaints, as we know, can range, but ultimately giving that feedback is really important to the complainer, because otherwise it might materialise into a stage 2, for example, which we're trying to avoid.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So Councillor Scobie and then Councillor Beretti in the room.
Yeah, and just remark firstly that the Monad report is very informative. But having said that, just reference to what Vlad was saying, and for 4.57, it refers to user satisfaction. And it goes on, or rather in 4.5.6, it refers to 480 cases of the 582 that had been closed down. I just wonder, going along the same lines that Archie was asking and Vlad referred to or responded to, of those 480, how many indicated they were satisfied with the outcome? There's no reference to it. They could have just given up and said, look, I'm not taking it any further, I've had enough. It's how many have actually indicated that they were satisfied with the outcome, and how can we report this in some percentage figure, as the report does cover in a lot of detail. Again, on the learning issue, of how many of the 582 were of same or similar complaints, and what was learned to put right in these complaints to reduce similar complaints. So have the 582 been looked at? Just as a point of interest, on page 30, on page 25 under 4.5.6, it refers to 2023-24 as 582 cases, yet on page, I think it's 35, that refers to, or it refers to 23-24, yet on page 35, that refers, these figures refer to 22-23, where there has been an increase, as Archie recognised, in 23-24. So it's really the questions of, how satisfied have the complainants been, and how do we record this of that 480 figures, and equally of the 582, how many would have a similar or same complaint, so that we can reduce similar complaints. And similar to 4.2, where it refers to stage 2 complaints being reduced from last year, or 21-22, it reduced from the figure now being above 50%, still not meeting that target date of the number of days to respond to complainants, and that's 18 out of 35. Of those 18, how many of the 18 complaints were down to shortage of investigating officers, and how successful has the recruiting been to get more investigating officers into place?
Thanks, Councillor Scobie. So there's a few questions in there. Obviously, I think there's maybe just a whether or not corrections needed in terms of the 582/631 tied to 2023-24, and just that clarification around that. But the other points about how are people satisfied at the stage 1 stage, and is there common learning points for similar types of complaints? And then the other part about the stage 2s and that resourcing issue. So, Nick, do you want to come in first, and then I'll pass over to Vlad as well for any additional response.
Yeah, if I address firstly the issue about stage 1s and satisfaction. So in terms of, if you look at the our comparative statistics against the family groups and Scotland-wide, Scotland-wide, we do quite well in terms of the number of complaints. Whilst they have increased this year, we compare quite favourably in terms of the family group 1 average and the Scotland average in terms of our percentage per 1,000 of population. It's difficult to be definitive about the numbers of stage complaints closed at stage 1, whether that translates into, well, lots of those people who've had their complaints closed at stage 1 are satisfied. Everyone reserves the right to take complaints to stage 2 if they aren't satisfied. So it doesn't necessarily translate, but our record in terms of closing/resolving complaints at the lowest level, i.e. stage 1 at frontline service level, is sort of compares very well against across Scotland as a whole. I think that's all I can say in terms of the stage 1, the split between stage 1 and stage 2. In terms of the learning, yes, as I mentioned in the answer to Councillor Dryborough, that is something the team looks at in terms of what's the learning we're getting from these complaints, in terms of looking at trends. Is there a hot spot in a particular service where they're getting lots of complaints about the same thing? So that's something we would take up with services, and then look to the service to come up with a way forward in terms of improving the situation. Yeah, that's essentially we know as an action that the team want to develop further the best means of communicating those lessons across the organisation, because, as I say, we want to improve across the board rather than in particular areas. Don't know whether, Vlad, you wanted to come in at that point.
Yeah, thanks, Nick. So, Vlad, I think the couple of other points were to do with the numbers and the years, I think, within the report. That was just maybe a point of clarification. And then about the stage 2 and the resourcing, if that's got an impact as well.
I think maybe I should come back on the numbers side. I'd have to look. I'd have to raise that with the team. I can't definitively say whether it's just a typographical error. But yeah, Councillor Scobie's quite right that there is an inconsistency there between the numbers there, the 480 of 582, whereas the total in-year complaints received in 23-24 is 631.
Okay, thanks, Nick. Over to you, lad.
Yeah, I can maybe provide hopefully a wee bit of clarity. My understanding is that the figure in paragraph 4.5.6, I think it was, that Councillor Scobie was referring to, is only stage 1, whereas what you've got in the table in 4.5.1 is all complaints. Not just the stage 1, so there'll be stage 2 within that. So I think that's where the difference in the data comes from. In terms of the other question from Councillor Scobie on the investigating officers, just to clarify for members, we're not recruiting investigating officers as such in terms of having a job description and in essence that's all they do. This is part and parcel of what we do in our different roles, and therefore what we're recruiting is to ensure that all services have sufficient number of investigating officers who are trained to a certain level that can carry out these investigations and in essence be able to have that succession and resilience within that where people are unable to take on an investigation for whatever reason. The timelines for these stage 2 complaints are really tight, and that's something that we've picked up in Audit, Risk and Scrutiny Committee before, and at times are actually highly unrealistic because what we're trying to do at stage 2 is ensure that a proper investigation is carried out, and therefore we can provide assurance to the complainer that we've done that and in essence prevent it and get the satisfaction from that complainer so that we can prevent it going to the next stage, which would be obviously the Ombudsman. So the purpose of that stage 2 for me is to get it right, and at times that we're unable to do that within the dedicated kind of timescales for it, even where the complainer is unable to support us and try and get it through that timeline. So they might say, look, I can't meet the investigating officer for 2-3 weeks because I'm away on holiday, and that naturally means that we've already failed in that timeline because we're unable to sit down with the complainer to thrash out and ensure that we are investigating the right things to get the right outcome. So there's a general consensus that these extensions, even though they're agreed with the complainer, in essence still means that we're obviously within our data that we have to publish that we're failing the deadlines, but that's actually not the purpose of the stage 2. My view would be I would turn it on its head and say the purpose of the stage 2 is to get that right and get that right for the complainer, and if that takes a wee bit more time, which means that our data looks slightly out, then I'd rather we did that.
Thanks, lad. Councillor Scobie.
Yeah, if I could come back to you, and I totally agree with Vlad, it's more important we get the complaint right and to the satisfaction of the person making that complaint. And as Vlad rightly points out, if they know they can then move to the further stage of the SPSO if they still remain dissatisfied. I wasn't thinking, Vlad, that you would go externally under job description. I was just asking within the confines of the employees whether we've been successful in bringing on people rather than maybe the word recruit, bringing on people to carry out this function as investigating officers, which is a skill in itself, and it's really just to ask how successful we had been in that, and if that had anything to do with the delays or the 18 or the 35. Just on the point that Nick made, in terms of stage 1 satisfaction, I wasn't, and Archie made the point that we favour fairly in the comparisons to the rest of Scotland. What I was saying was, and if you look at 4.57, the SPSO stated complaints handling principle states that an effective complaints handling procedure aims to resolve the complaints to the service users' satisfaction wherever possible and appropriate. And that's why I was asking the question, do we actually monitor how many are satisfied? And from what Nick was saying, I don't think we do. And it's, you know, a requirement, if you like, reading that paragraph with the SPSO. And it's how do we monitor that to see that they're satisfied, or they've just given up at stage 1 and taken it no further into a stage 2 or even further from there. So it's the figures, and how do we reflect that people are satisfied, and that we can show this in the annual report.
Yeah, so thanks, Councillor Scobie. So Vlad, you may want to give that further assurance on the staff and resourcing, I think, although I know you've sort of covered that. But in terms of the satisfaction, as Nick was saying, it seems to be a sort of default that if somebody doesn't progress to stage 2, which is their sort of right to do so, if they feel that something hasn't been addressed satisfactorily at stage 1 stage. But like you say, that's I suppose that makes an assumption about people who choose not to take it further, and so we don't actually proactively measure that in any sort of sense that we can report, I think, if I've picked Nick up correctly. But Vlad, you're sort of nodding next to me, so I'll just pass over to you at this point.
Through yourself, Chair, yeah, that's correct. We're not measuring that in of itself. Happily to discuss that with the team to see what potentially we could do in that regard. But I wouldn't want to create, again, an industry which is, in essence, chasing those complainers who are satisfied, who are more than content and aren't progressing to any extra level, to then obviously get communications chasing them for potential responses to that, because generally, as members have discussed today, we try and deal with complaints at source, and that doesn't necessarily mean that we've got that kind of written form or ability to contact the complainer to get their sense of satisfaction as such within that. But that's potentially something we can look at within the team. In terms of numbers, I see Nick's put his hand up. I don't know if Nick's got the numbers of investigating officers, but I know that the volume was a rather large number, which will give members assurance. And if we don't have that to hand today, happy to send that to members after this committee.
Thanks, Vlad. So, Nick, I'll bring you in first before the next member.
Thanks, Jay. Yeah, you're right, Vlad. I don't have the specific number to hand, but we did go out on a recruitment exercise to ensure that we've got appropriate coverage across all the directorates, so that you get that. We've got insight in amongst the cadre of investigating officers across the service, across the various services. So we're happy to provide the sort of totality of the numbers we've got on the books at the moment. Thank you. Okay. Sorry, Chair. Sorry to leap back in again, but what I did want to say that when we do go to a stage 2, one of the important parts of the process is to, and as daft as it may sound, we actually go through a process of agreeing the terms of the complaint with the complainant to ensure that we are addressing the specific issues that they're trying to raise with the council, because it's very easy for an investigating officer to investigate what they believe to be the nub of a complaint, whereas a complainant can then come back at the end of the process, say, well, actually, you haven't addressed a couple of points that were fairly fundamental to what gave rise to the complaint in the first place. So just to assure members that is an important part of the process, and that complies with the SPSO's CHP process also. Thank you.
Thanks, Nick. That's helpful additional information. So, Councillor Scobie, I think at this point we've got a kind of assurance that they'll explore, Vlad will explore with the team ways of measuring satisfaction within reason, I think, and also the details and the number of officers. But if you'll permit, there's a number of other members wanting to come in, so I'll move on just now. So Councillor Beretti in the room, and then I've got a few online.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Page 34, going into the more granular detail of the complaints, I noticed that just to take out 4 in particular: road conditions, road maintenance, drains, planning, and the last one, potholes, and in particular potholes. I can't believe that only 13 complaints were made. Now, I know that this is complaints possibly made on an online, but given that 13 is my usual tally every month, does that mean we're not capturing all the complaints? Because I do get, and no doubt every elected member gets, on those particular 4 complaints. Now, are people not going through the procedure and then going through elected members? But our process is different to the people who want to complain. So what can we do in addition? Because I'm sure that potholes, if we added up all the pothole complaints, it would be the top of the list.
Thanks, Councillor Beretti. So I suppose elected members, we report a lot of service issues and service faults, but that's not necessarily moving to what would be a formal complaint stage. So I suppose, Nick, if you could respond on behalf of the sort of staff response, because obviously I really don't know what I'm talking about half the time.
No, you've hit the nail on the head there, Chair. That's exactly right. If an initial inquiry, let's say, rather than use the word complaint, if an initial inquiry came in from the public about a pothole on a particular road, that would be deemed to be a service request and dealt with as business as usual, rather than being deemed as specifically as a complaint, and then it would add into those numbers that you see on page 34. So I think that would be the explanation as to why that number there is lower than members might expect, given the sort of the contact you have with constituents about such matters.
Thanks for clarifying that. Quickly, Councillor Beretti.
But if the public are looking at this, which is an annual report, then they're only going to see 13. So that's just one issue, the potholes, and they're only going to see 11 drains. So what will the public take from this?
I don't know if there's anybody here can speak on behalf of the whole of the public, but Nick, do you want to have a go?
I'll give it my best shot. I'd use another analogy, Chair, just in terms of a missed bin collection, for example. That wouldn't be registered as a complaint. In essence, the resolution of the inquiry/complaint would be the council going back and collecting the bin that was missed. It wouldn't necessarily at that point be logged as a formal complaint and go into the system, as it were. Hopefully, when things are raised in that manner, they're resolved quite quickly, so don't give rise to a formal complaint. Don't know whether that assists at all, Chair.
I see a either happy or resigned wave from Councillor Beretti, so I think that's fine for just now. But thanks for that. So we've got a number of speakers online. Firstly, Councillor Hagman, then Councillor McCammon, then Councillor Walters, then Councillor Marshall. So Councillor Hagman first.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, a couple of points from myself, if I may. The first one is I'll jump to the conclusion, and the third paragraph, it acknowledges that we've recorded an increase in the number of complaints when compared to previous years, and it says that this could be partly attributed to better awareness of the process. That's word for word what we said last year. I've not checked in the year before, but we need to be really mindful, I think, in our words. It's quite easy to say, oh, well, it's just because more people know they can complain, and that could be the rationale. So it'd be useful to know what assumption are we basing this on, because we said the same last year, and how are we justifying that? Now, I have had a look at last year's report. It's not linked as background papers, which might be helpful just for tracking, because again, it goes back to the previous item of we've got this information, but what does it overall mean? In isolation, it's not always helpful, but we have got some comparisons within the report, so that is helpful. But previous speakers have referenced where we're sitting overall nationally. So I would highlight, can we be mindful maybe not just to copy and paste reports from last year, because I don't think that's really helpful. The second point I wanted to make was in regards to, I have had a look at the Ombudsman's website, and there's documents on there about child-friendly complaints handling procedures. And the question is, how are we ensuring that we're adhering to our responsibilities in terms of rights of the child, which became legislation this year? So there's specific issues that we as a local authority need to be mindful of. And that, it ties into the fact that on page 34 references behaviour and bullying in schools. So are there child-friendly procedures in place that are actually capturing these issues, or are these as a result of parents, are they of the young people? There's not that level of information. So in order for us to go forward correctly and ensuring that our young people are supported, and I appreciate there's a separate piece of work in terms of bullying that has been brought forward as a result of the SNP motion to council. I've just really been mindful of how we capture this in the annual reporting. And the final point that I wanted to just raise, and again, it was brought up when I was having a look at last year's annual report, and it said in last year's annual report, Education and Learning notes that the above figures do not accurately reflect the number of complaints received by the Directorate, as many of these are acknowledged and remain at school level. So that was acknowledged last year. That hasn't been copied and pasted into this year's report. So that's good, but how have we taken forward that weakness within our system? Because I'm loath to direct people who have complaints at the school level straight into the official complaints procedures, and I will always encourage them to speak to the school first of all. But if we're not getting that information back, how do I know how many complaints are received at a school level that haven't gone into the official complaints procedure? So from that point of view, I perhaps should be encouraging everybody to use the complaints procedure, because that's the only way that I'll get an indication as to how schools are doing specifically. So a couple of points there, Chair. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Councillor Hagman. So there's a few there. Obviously, there's I suppose, the notional copy and paste of the conclusion, and is there something there that we need to be more accurate about? Then there's the child-friendly complaints handling. How are we, what assurance can we give that we're addressing that and making that part of our process? And also then the part about, I suppose, specifically on the schools, are we sure we're getting sight of all the information where it relates to a school? Because that's where we might at first point sort of direct any inquiries to. So do we know what comes out of that, or is it a sort of black box in terms of information? So Nick, over to you first.
Thanks, Chair. Yes, thanks, Councillor Hagman. In terms of the conclusions and the numbers, if you like, it is difficult to give a definitive answer as to why the number of complaints has increased year on year, but you can see with the exception of 2021, should I say, the sort of height of COVID, complaints have been on an upward trend for a number of years now. I'm sure it extends further back than 1920. I can speak with the team about doing some work on perhaps getting underneath those figures as to give us a bit more insight into the reason for the increase. But as we stand, it's difficult to give you a definitive answer to that question. In relation to the SPSO's launch of child-friendly complaints, this came in May this year, and the principles aren't intended to stand alone, but add to the main principles of the CHP and adapting our complaints processes to meet children's rights and needs. The information governance team will be looking to deliver a programme of awareness raising for all staff to support them using the guidance, which will aim to supplement the existing CHP whenever a child is involved. So we're liaising closely with colleagues in education on that, and we'll bring something forward and provide a briefing to members on the impact of child-friendly complaints to the overall CHP. In terms of the complaints received at schools, then obviously it taps into our overall objective of dealing with complaints at the point of receipt wherever possible. But I'm not sure. Well, I mean, I guess we're open to discussion about how do we maybe capture those complaints and give oversight of the numbers being received in schools to members if that's something they wish to see. But we'd have to look into that and have discussions with education, etc., to make sure we're all on the same page, as it were.
Okay, thanks, Nick. So there's a couple of things there. So the child-friendly, the sort of awareness that you're raising this year, will that, I suppose the natural question would be, will that feature in our complaints monitoring report next year to sort of include that? And also in terms of the schools, it begs the question, well, do we know then, do the figures include the complaints that may or may not be going at a school level but may be getting resolved there, not going any further at stage one, where we're sort of addressing it there and then? So are we looking at all the complaints, or is it all bar the ones that we think may be being dealt with in a school? Because I think that's a pertinent question. I don't know if that's where you were coming from, Councillor Hagman.
For me, Chair, it's about how do I, as an elected member, have an understanding of what's happening within our schools, while respecting that the schools, are an autonomous, under the head teacher's guidance. If we're not getting feedback through this process, how can we, I don't know what the number of complaints are going into the school, and I think that would be useful to know, to determine whether there is a trend, because often elected members might get called in and there might be lots of anecdotal, I know of X, Y, and Z that has happened, I know other people have complained, but that's not actually being captured anywhere, and a lot of that is anecdotal. So it's just, how do we capture that information? Is that something that the head teachers reflect back to the directorate? And if that's the case, is it reported to the Education Committee? I'm just not sure how that's actually captured, and it was acknowledged in last year's report that it wasn't captured. It's not mentioned in this year's report. So what happened as a result of last year's report, the monitoring report, because it said we're aware that this isn't being captured. So what work has been done since last year and this year to address that? Thanks.
Okay, I've just had a quick word with Vlad before Nick comes in, but I think that's a specific action we could capture in terms of dealing with education, about how we could best do that. Just for clarity, but Vlad, I don't know if you want to say a few words on that before Nick may want to come in to sort of touch on some of the other points.
Yeah, I think happy to explore that, Councillor Hagman, and look to see how we can do that productively. I think that's the important piece, and some of it will no doubt be that that service request that's come through various channels have been addressed and in essence don't become a complaint because they've been addressed. The relevant complainer, if we call them that at that point in time, is more than satisfied and that's resolved. I don't think we need to be capturing those kind of service requests in that way in this report. There might be other ways of capturing that, but certainly I wouldn't be keen, because that might give a false reflection of, again, us dealing with things at source and then being captured as a complaint when it's actually a service request or some other form of inquiry that's been addressed. So we need to be careful about the stats, and the stats won't tell us the whole picture around it. But we're happy to explore that in terms of looking at education and those particular complaints as to how they're capturing that at their end, so that it can be reported in some form, not necessarily through this process.
Okay, we'll take that as an action, at least I think it seems reasonable. But Nick, did you want to add anything to that before we go on to the next speaker?
Just to reiterate, Chair, in terms of if you look at the numbers, it's clear that this year's report, like last year's, doesn't include those complaints received by schools. I would expect to see a larger number than 631 were that to be the case, if you think about the entire school estate there. Thank you.
Okay, thanks for that. So thanks for patiently waiting. Members, Councillor McCammon.
Yeah, thanks very much, Chair. It was just before I go into my question, just it may be worth your group leads talking to each service about the complaints, because I know when I was in Communities Vice Chair, we certainly got a monthly report of communities complaints. So I don't think, in my own personal opinion, I don't think it's appropriate to bring it to this committee. It needs to stay at service level so nothing gets lost. But anyway, that's just my opinion and my tuppence worth there. Going on to my question, please, Chair, if I may. This report is particularly interesting for me, given that I've done a lot of work around customer care training in a past life. And hats off to Nick and their team. It's a difficult remit. If it's part of your remit, it's a difficult, tough task dealing with complaints. But I've listened to the discussion, and there's lots of valid points made and lots of important actions being taken away so far. But there's lots of talk of the quantitative statistics, and that's all very well, and they have their place and they are important. Lots of talk of stage 1, stage 2 customer satisfaction comparisons and all that jazz. But I have to say, one of the biggest, most important points in customer care training is soft skills, and I don't see any of that in this report. So obviously we can't have a look at the quality of responses, but admittedly I have been sent by constituents responses to complaints, and they've been quite eye-watering to read sometimes. And that's just, I'm not saying that is an overall take on how we deal with them, but sometimes they are very robotic, the responses, they're very corporate. But actually, my question is, Nick, what do we train our staff in terms of, and how do we train our staff in terms of soft skills? Because it will come, listening skills, for example, comes naturally to some people, and other people it is a box ticking exercise. And I don't mean that disrespectfully, but it is super important that we come across as a human in an email, in a EMES, if you like, or a response of any sort, even on the telephone. So I must admit, I am disappointed in this report, and it hasn't talked a lot about soft skills, and it's more about quantitative reports, which is fine. Like I say, they've got their place, but I would like to know exactly what and how our staff and our officers are trained. And it goes from someone who takes the initial call right through to the investigating officer, because it is really important that it's the same training, albeit it'll be to a different level, to a degree, for the investigating officer. But I would like to know what training we are given to talk to constituents via email and telephone or whatever form as human beings, and not a box ticking exercise, not a stage 1, stage 2 satisfaction aim, but as human to human. How are we training our staff to tell them that is super important in this process? Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor McCammon. And I appreciate the report in itself. So there is I suppose a duty really to report in terms of what the the Public Service Ombudsman has set out in terms of indicators. So that's maybe the robotic bit in a sense, or the box ticking. But I take the point completely, that because we also want to celebrate the softer side of things, where we don't have to statutorily report on compliments, for example, but that's the kind of maybe softer side of what we do capture. And I think there is something in about the training element, about how we're responding as people to people with complaints, etc., in that process. So Nick, over to you in terms of that assurance about staff training, and indeed what type of training do staff get, if you're able to speak to that.
I can certainly speak to the training that investigating officers receive, which again is anyone becoming an investigating officer does have does undertake some training. There's a one-day training course run by the team for investigating officers in terms of best practice in how to approach an investigation, etc., how to draft what we'd expect to see in an investigating officer's report, the sort of basic process of undertaking an investigation and gathering evidence and making an assessment. Suffice to say that an investigating officer doesn't respond directly to a complainant. The investigating officer prepares a report for the responsible manager, who would be a head of service, who would essentially consider the investigating officer's report, and then they would prepare a final letter, piece of correspondence to go to the complainant, taking into consideration the findings of the investigating officer and reaching decisions, basically decisions on the various heads of complaint. I alluded to it in one of my answers to an earlier question in terms of that, the importance of agreeing the terms of complaint to make sure that we get under the skin of what it is that the customer's dissatisfied about before the investigating officer embarks on the investigation. So I'd see that as one of the pieces of learning that we've picked up on in terms of investigations. In terms of, I think that's probably as much as I can say in terms. I know I focused solely on investigating officers, but that's the side that I'm more involved with, it, if you will.
Yep, thanks. And Vlad, so Vlad will come in at this point as well. Thanks, Nick.
Yeah.
Thank you, Chair, and absolutely agree with Councillor McCammon in terms of the importance around the humanity piece in dealing with complaints and trying to resolve these. And again, obviously our main aim is to ensure that we don't have a complaint in the first place, and that prevention better than cure scenario. And that's done through a number of methods. Nick's alluded to it in terms of the investigating officers, but there's also training packages for staff in terms of managing complaints and dealing with the public. All of that will encompass some of those softer skills that you talk about, and actually I would suggest that I know we call them soft skills, but I would say that they're actually harder because you're absolutely trying to do that kind of human element of it, which you might be dealing with a very angry person, and that's actually quite difficult to do and manage. And we do that through a number of levels, as I mentioned, in terms of the various training packages that we deliver, in terms of dealing with customers, not just complaints, and that's important that we have that focus. And also not just in terms of the training, but also in terms of the ongoing mentoring and coaching from obviously staff who are experienced and well versed in managing these things. It's all part and parcel of what we do. Probably harder to state that as a fact or a stat in terms of this particular report, but absolutely understand where Councillor McCammon's coming from, and I can give the assurance that that's all happening at different levels.
Thanks for that. So Councillor McCammon, I hope that goes some way towards addressing your concerns, but do you want to come back?
Can I just, Yeah, sorry, I know that this has kind of been a lengthy discussion, so I'll be quick. Vlad, is there any chance that you're able to share these training packages at all? Because I'm interested to see them as a member. You know, if we're getting this level of data, I'm interested to see just behind the scenes, if you like, and how the complaint is being handled, and what basis and what process are they following. Yep, for stage 1, stage 2, blah blah blah, but also in terms of dealing with a person. So if you could share them with me if you want, or anybody else that's interested, or the committee, but I would really be interested to see that. Thank you.
Thank you. So, I mean, is there access to either online or training packages that we're able to, you know, pass on that information to elected members just for awareness?
Yes, thank you, Chair, through yourself. Happy to take that way as an action, and with our colleagues, and I'm not sure if James McDowell's in the room. He may well be able to assist us as well in terms of providing that. So we can certainly look to open that up for members if we can, so we'll go and explore that. But at the very least, we can probably give you the PowerPoints or whatever else in terms of the kind of skeleton of those, if we can't open up the access. I don't want to speak from colleagues as I don't know what the IT system is, but more than happy to provide that.
Okay, excellent, thank you. So we move on to Councillor Walters.
Yeah, I just wanted to pick up on this idea of learning from complaints. I was looking at the page 46, where it talks about projected figures for 2024-25. Underneath that table, it says we moved to Lagan, the new complaints management system, and the reporting functionality is not built into the system. And I suppose my first question is, why did we put a system live that doesn't have a reporting function? Because obviously it's, you know, it's something it's mentioned earlier on in the report as well, that we couldn't look at lessons learned because we can't get reports for the fourth quarter. And secondly, when it says we're currently working with our third-party supplier and business and technology solutions, have we got a timescale for this? Because presumably the next meeting of this committee, we're going to have the same issue if we can't get this reporting functionality to work for the previous 3-6 months. That's my question.
Thanks, Councillor Walters. Yes, and I mean, I might often joke, maybe not the right word, about the council website, but in terms of this one, surely there's a clearer timescale in terms of when that might be completed. Nick, are you able to respond to that one?
I can certainly take that away and address that with the team, but certainly the move to Lagan as opposed to Verint, it does have some advantages in terms of we're now using one system for complaints as well as FOI and a number of other elements that the team are involved in. So there's efficiencies, if you like, in terms that we've been able to deliver, but the reporting mechanism isn't as advanced as it was within Verint at the time. But there are we're working with BTS to address that, and also the change has delivered a saving in excess of £40,000 in the last year.
Thanks. We'll take that as an action then to get the information back. So hopefully that goes some way towards that, Councillor Walters.
Yes, as long as we do get an answer back on some sort of timescale. I'm going to say that it's great to hear there have been savings, but if we're getting something which has got poorer functionality, that's not great news, is it? Okay, thanks very much.
Yeah, no, point taken. Thank you. So, Councillor Marshall.
Yeah, and Keith has just covered one of my points. You know, if we're seeing an increase in trend, then really we should be, getting, the system should be working and giving us all the outputs that we would expect. But what to kind of concentrate on, and I think Councillor McCallan and Katie has actually already touched on, and it's in relation to in the report 4.5.4, we are seeing an increase in trend, and you're right to kind of say it might be partly attributed to people being more aware that there's a complaints handling procedure, but we also emphasise again in the conclusion of the report We don't really, I think there needs to be a more, and I think Nick suggested a more of a kind of forensic look at, you know, why there is an increase, because their indication is in 2024 there's got to be even more, and that's, you know, from a point of view, if that part of that is due to people are aware that they can complain, that's fine. But on the other side of that, it could be that the service is getting worse. And that's what we've got, you know, that's what we've got to look at as well. And there's some I think there's some quick wins with regards, and this gets about to the soft skills, because if you look at page 34, when we analyse last year's figures, the 621 complaints, at the bottom of page 34, it's got 80 of those complaints, and these, you know, I see this as the tip of the iceberg. I think the complaints procedure is the tip of the iceberg, you can see, because people have actually done that. But obviously, there's a lot of people that don't bother to complain about the services. So, you know, I think this is a real problem. We need to kind of tackle it. And if you look, there's 80 that felt that the conduct, treatment, or attitude of a member of staff or contractor was a reason why they felt they needed to complain. And more so as well, failure to reply to correspondence, telephone calls, you know, that's nearly about 10%, you know, the 25 and 18. So, you know, it's people, if they take the time to actually report something to the council and they're promised to respond, really we should be responding to that. So I do think that we need to try and, because it's an increasing trend, we need to try and do something more. And I noted what Councillor McCammon said. I thought that was, you know, good that there was a weekly report on the complaints performance, and that has now kind of seen a monthly monitoring report. But that just goes to the officers. I think us as elected members want to ensure that, you know, our constituents, you know, are being dealt with the way that we would expect them to be dealt with. So I think that we need to see on a regular basis, and I don't know what the best process for doing that, but I think it's something that we should think about and recommend something so that we can monitor it and actually intervene or help to try and get a downward trend. And I don't know if that's a monthly report, that monthly report going to the group leads, or whether or not, I don't know, within service plans and within the performance indicators that, you know, there's targets set up from each department about how many complaints, you know, or set a target and work towards that and look at the reasons why there may be an increase in the trend. But there's definitely things that we should be doing, because I don't think the trend is going to go the other way, judging from the last 3 or 4 years stats. And finally, just on a positive note, I think the compliments, that's increasing trend as well. And, you know, people are less likely to compliment a service, but it's encouraging that is an increasing trend as well.
Okay, thanks, Councillor Marshall. Yeah, so I mean, I'm interested in how we would be made aware, sort of maybe at regular intervals, about what types of complaints were coming through, especially if we wanted to direct where we wanted to prioritise things, especially if it's about how we respond to things. I think the point Councillor McCammon made about the reports coming maybe through the director meetings or whatever, you know, that's maybe helpful in terms of communities, but I think part of the earlier issue was that that's maybe not happening within education because of the sort of relative autonomy of schools and how things might be dealt with there. So there is probably some piece of work there about how we better understand what is and isn't a complaint at a school setting and how that is or isn't reported within this document or in another format. So, I mean, it's quite a big question there, Councillor Marshall, but I think clearly it's a concern. I'm also noting that the benchmarking information that we have over our change in numbers of reports per year shows an increase, which is fairly straightforward to see, but the benchmarking information against other local authorities only shows it for 1 year, and we don't really know what the trend is with those local authorities, if they've had a similar increase over the years or not. So, so it's maybe are we getting the right information to make a sensible and complex comparison? I don't know. But if the upshot is how can members get a sight of complaints throughout the year on a regular sort of basis, I'll have to defer to the likes of Nick and Vlad in the room. So Nick, in the first instance, can you help Councillor Marshall with his position there?
I think in terms of the underlying cause of the rises, it is difficult to draw any, as you say, from the information we have available. It's difficult to draw any conclusion. Is it increased demand? Is it, as someone mentioned, the position of a service getting, the delivery of a service getting worse, or is it just more demands being placed on that service? Or you can't determine that from the information we have here. I think in terms of your points about schools complaints, etc., yes, there is work that needs to be done alongside education to better understand those and see how they are recorded and referenced, and the insight that can be given to members on those complaints. In terms of can you just remind me the latter point that Councillor Marshall was seeking input on? Sorry.
So there was a point about, and forgive me for speaking for you, Councillor Marshall, but there was a point about how do we as elected members get that regular reporting of complaints by director or department, whatever it might be. That was certainly one of them.
Yeah. Yes, I think again we'd have to take that away and look at what options we may have in terms of, because as has been mentioned, certainly within communities there was regular communication on a monthly basis, but again that's to a small number of members, a chair and vice chair, so the wider cadre of members wouldn't have that oversight. So there is a piece of work we maybe need to do in terms of, if that's members' will, as to how we sort of give a bit more visibility to this on an ongoing basis. I know the figures are collated annually in terms of meeting the requirements for the SPSO reporting, but obviously there are reports made to directorates, and directorates have a handle on how many they've got come in this month, etc., what the nature of them is, the analysis of them, are there any trends there in terms of a particular service having difficulties or something. So there is certainly, there's avenues which I think are worthy of exploring in terms of how we improve the data that we're able to make available.
Thanks, Nick. So, Councillor Marshall, do you want to make maybe a specific request for the committee to consider, and then we can take that forward?
Yeah, I wouldn't really want, just to agree something today. I think Nick's suggestion is to go away and look at it and come back with maybe a way of, so that members are better informed. So, and this is so that we're probably in a position to maybe help or whatever. It's just to get that trend down. So there's a number of things that could be done, but I think it's just about getting more members involved and for us to see the not just once a year, but to see it, on a regular basis, and the nature of those complaints as well. And I think, it could be the report that comes back could look also at other areas that have been touched off by members today. And one of the ones that I noticed as well is, it's disappointing we've only had 18 responses to the survey, and it's maybe ways of how we can improve that as well, because everyone that goes to stage 1 or stage 2 gets the opportunity to do that, and that might actually help us to improve that as well. Because at the moment, when you look at that, of the 18 that responded, over 60% of them, I think the crucial one is on page 39, overall, was I satisfied with the handling of my complaint? And over 60%, 10 of the 18 are saying no, and only 4 kind of agree that they felt that was done. So I think more information on how we can improve that, but the main thing is about monitoring reports on an ongoing basis, but I think it's best that Officers go away, look at that and come back with some recommendations how that can be done.
Yeah, no, that's helpful. I'll probably invite Vlad in, but I think if there's a way that we can share more readily at regular intervals across directorates with elected members, and whether that's some kind of lead for each group, or whether it's through leaders panel or whatever that might be, then that's maybe a potential way forward. But Vlad, I don't know if you can take something from this just now. Obviously, we're not making a hard and fast decision right now on this, but any thoughts on this at the moment?
Yes, thank you, Chair. I'm more than happy to look into it, and I think that's what the ask is, and then we'll come back to members of this committee just in terms of that particular ask, and there might be routes to it. What I'm really keen to do from an officer's perspective is obviously in terms of capacity and ensuring that we're not creating an industry and how much value that industry is actually going to bring for members, bearing in mind that all these this is part and parcel of the operational side of things in terms of managing complaints, ensuring that we address these and that lessons are learned through that. And we've got very clear duties and responsibilities as officers in terms of managing that. And certainly I would try and avoid creating a potential industry, particularly where it's, as members picked up, the current systems don't really give us that reporting element of it. So again, we're having to manually do these. So to have that kind of ongoing, not only reporting but scrutiny to that level that's been mentioned, could potentially create some difficulties for officers. But I'm more than happy to go away and look at that and fully consider it, and then come back to members on it.
Thanks, Vlad. I think that's a helpful way forward. Okay, I think, members, we've given that report a fairly good going over, and there's quite a lot of actions and considerations that have come out of it. So with that, I'll move to recommendations. We've been asked to approve the annual complaints monitoring report as detailed in the appendix, and then approve the publication of the report on the Council's website as per the SPSO requirements. Now, there's a number of actions to take away, and I think it would probably be helpful if we could get a summary. Once that's signed off, as it were, happy for that to be circulated to members of the committee, so we can keep tabs on the actions. So with that, are we happy to agree the recommendations? Okay, thank you. So that takes us on to item 6, which is the regulation of investigatory powers, or RIPSA, use of powers and future intentions. And we've got Mark Thompson here to assist members if they have any questions. Mark, is there anything you'd like to add to this before we open it up?
Yes, thanks, Chair. Just to highlight and apologise to the committee, I've noticed a minor error in the use of an acronym for the Investigatory Powers Commissioner's Office. It should read IPCO rather than IPSO, so I do apologise to the committee for that, if you notice that in the report. Out with that, the report discharges our statutory responsibilities to report on use of investigatory powers under the Regulation of Investigatory Powers Scotland Act. In the previous period, there's only been one instance of the use of the powers. The report further highlights the successful audit, a successful outcome of audit by IPCO, and further it gives some brief details on future plans and intentions with regards to managing these powers going forward as well. So happy to take any questions on this.
Thanks, Mark. So, Councillor Drybra.
Yes, thanks very much, Chair, and apologies for having to leave. When you're in a hospital, you get interrupted by doctors and nurses for some reason. Just a couple of things on this and the recommendations. First of all, I agree to note 2.1. This is something we have to do. Just on 2.2 and at 4.8, the Council's policy that are currently being reviewed and once complete will be presented to the Enabling and Customer Services Committee. Is there a time frame on that, Mark?
The next available committee, Councillor Driver, thanks for your question. I have the updated policy documents ready. So in effect, is to put it through that process. So one would hope I will be able to actually do that for the next available committee. So it's all ready. I just need to do the covering report and submit it through the appropriate channels.
Okay, that's great. Thanks.
Thank you, and hopefully that's probably on the forward plan. Councillor Marshall?
Yeah, it's just in relation to 4.2 that, you know, the likelihood is that the council would probably have less reasons to use this. What kind of is there an example of when we would now in this current situation how we would maybe use that?
Yes. So, given a kind of brief 3.3 in the report gives you an overview of the reasons why you would want to utilise these powers in kind of broad terms. So it's the preventing or detecting crime, prevention of disorder in the interest of public safety, for the purpose of public health, or for any other purpose described in an order made by Scottish ministers. But and I suppose an example of where there has been a decline in usage is probably a good way to start this. And one is that historically we may have seen in marketplaces or on streets at times the sale of illegal DVDs and CDs, which is somewhere where the investigatory powers could have been used. Now that, because the world has changed so much in terms of things moving online, that's not so much of an issue. But again, using a more recent example without giving any details, the last use of the powers involved the monitoring and the identification of images of individuals who were reportedly involved in doorstop crime, to allow the identification of these individuals by the person who was the victim of that crime. So that there are a number. More and more we will see the use of these powers on an online basis, and certainly the Information Investigatory Powers Commissioner's Office are very, very keen to highlight that social media, the use of social media for investigating matters is something that we can't forget with the use of these, and it is probably the most likely avenue going forward. But notwithstanding that, there still is the opportunity for in-person use of these powers as well. It really is dependent on the nature of the matter under investigation. Sorry, it's slightly vague, but you can see that the changing world has resulted in a drop-off in terms of what we used to do, but there is still opportunities going forward to use it and use it appropriately.
Thanks, Mark. Sean, did you want back in on that?
No, thanks for that explanation, Mark. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And Councillor Beretti?
Yeah, thank you, Mark. I think you may have answered possibly some of my question, but although from page 52 and 44, it doesn't say clearly what the sector is, and it was just interesting to find out, is this something that is likely to happen again within our area?
Sorry, with regards to the incident referred to?
Yeah, without going into too many details of giving any information away that we don't need to know.
Yeah, well, that type of activity is exactly the type of thing that should there be a need, a request for use of the powers would be issued. So yes, there is every chance that kind of thing could happen again.
Okay, thanks for that. So I don't have any other hands up, so we'll go to the recommendations, and that is to note the single use of the RIPSA powers in 2023 as set out, and to consider the future intentions as referenced in paragraph 4.6 to 4.9. Members happy to agree? Okay, thank you. So that takes us on to item 7. And we've got our annual governance statement for 2024-25. We have Fraser Davis here to assist if members have any questions. Fraser, anything to add at this point before we open up to members?
Nothing at this point, Chair, but happy to take any questions.
Thank you. Any questions on this? So Councillor Dryburgh first, and then Councillor Beretti in the room.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. And just looking at 4.3 and the programme of different things as we go through for this is very similar to last year's, and I think it's good enough to make sure everybody has input to it. So happy to agree with the recommendations.
Thanks, Councillor Dryburgh. Councillor Barretti.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Looking at page 55, Principle D, ensuring openness and comprehensive stakeholder engagement. Just recently I mentioned about LDP3 engagement and how it, in my ward, that there weren't that many people engaging with the process. So how would that work going forward? And in page 56, Principle G, implementing good practices and transparencies, reporting and auditing to deliver effective accountability. Now, I know we're going to go into an article further on, but how does that process apply to schools and processes within schools?
Thanks, Councillor Barretti. So, Fraser, do you want to try and take that? Or, well, Vlad first, and then Fraser, if you want to add anything else.
Thank you, Chair. I'll maybe try and answer that. These are the principles, and I think that's laid out there in terms of what we've got to do in terms of our overall reporting and assurance that's been provided through that. That there's a different levels and ways in which each one of these principles is looked at for each service, and that applies right across the board for the whole council. And in essence, in the past, we've had very detailed questionnaire as such for those that are reporting through the relevant service or head of function or directorate, and that allows us to then analyse that and in essence look at the responses across the whole of the council to give a sense of that to members and that draft annual governance statement. But rather than going into how this is going to apply in one service, what I would say is all services need to be involved as part of the annual governance statement, and these questions are set out within the context of those principles for all the relevant managers and those that are reporting back to ensure themselves and to provide us with the evidence of that.
Thank you. And just in terms of if elected members do want to feed in, probably in the timeline, as Councillor Dryburgh has already alluded to in 4.3, there will be that engagement with political groups after we've seen the draft statement, which will come to this committee in January. So we'll get a chance to feed back into that before that gets, I suppose, finalised here for recommendation to full council. So with that, members, are we happy then to consider and agree the arrangements for the development of the annual governance statement? Yep, okay, thank you. So we'll now move on to item 8, which is internal audit reports issued. We've got Richard Fox, Jonathan and Stuart Clanahan available to speak to members if they have any questions. But I think what we'll do is we'll go through them in order of each appendix, so Appendix 1, Appendix 2, Appendix 3. But I think, Richard, I'll maybe over to you in terms of if you want to speak to the first one.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to say for this audit that this was at the request of the service themselves, who were aware that their own procedures were in need of review, so we've been supporting the service on this. The other thing to say is we've had a very good response from the service, and we've been working with them in the development of new procedures. So I'm satisfied that our concerns have been addressed. However, there will be a follow-up in the usual way to this committee in 6 months' time. Thank you, Chair.
That's helpful, thanks, Richard. So over to members. So the first appendix on page 63 relates to overseas school trips. Councillor Barretti and then Councillor Marshall.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I realise this is a report from last year, but and as Richard just said, that there are going to be recommendations going through and action points. Given looking at page 74, and it's the also relates to pages 69 and 70 with well, if going back to page 69, a robust risk assessment contingency plan has been developed to do with the trip leader approved by head teacher and so on and so forth. Now, in page 69, that's level of assurance is low. Now, I know going forward to page 74, and looking at part 6, there is a high priority to get this correct. And I'm just wondering what experience did you have? Because as a bilingual, having lived in several other countries, I can imagine the kind of problems you might get if we are sending someone over and they don't have the linguistic capacity and or the knowledge of how certain things are done in other societies and cultures.
Thanks, Councillor Beretti. Richard, can you assist with that one?
Thank you, Chair. I don't particularly have any particular examples of duty examples to share with this committee, I'm afraid. It's more the principle that the Council has robust risk management processes which have been set out, and it should be followed by schools, because as you allude to, overseas school trips cover a range of different scenarios, from a routine battlefield trip to within Europe, which is actually relatively low risk, to some of the more adventurous activities further afield where there is risk. And obviously, as members will be aware from discussions we've had over the years on risk management, the first thing to consider is whether actually the trip should itself take place, having assessed that risk. And that's what we've been lacking, is the development of, or we could see lacking the procedures, a consideration of all the risks that will be there, and sharing those risks with the relevant directorate, and then there is a decision as to whether the trip should take place, if that helps.
Do you want to come back on that one, Councillor Beretti?
I think it does. It's one of those things that when I was in school, I also did these school trips, and fortunately, a lot of the teachers who accompanied the trips were, in a sense, bilingual, but they often went to English-speaking locations. And that is, I think, one of the difficult things that we have, that we would like to see kids, or would like to see pupils going on trips to broaden their mind and broaden their cultural understanding. But there is clearly a risk which sometimes we cannot predict, because you simply can't foresee every single risk. But thank you very much, Chair.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Marshall, then Councillor Hagman.
Yeah, my question was with regards to, is this just, it covers, because I think it does mention at the in the introduction, it wasn't just school trips, there was one youth service trip as well, so which might not necessarily just be involving one school. And just on the staffing ratios, it's just basically, is there any limitation to, is that adult to be a teacher, or just want a little bit more clarity on that when it says one adult to every 12 young people?
Thanks, Councillor Marshall. Richard, can you help with this one, or is this one for... I appreciate Jonathan maybe on the call as well, but maybe not for this item. So,
Thank you, Chair. I would just say we did look at the staffing ratios and we were satisfied they were appropriate. I believe it is meant to be a teacher, but I'm happy to defer to John on that one.
John, are you able to assist with that?
Yes, thanks, Chair. Apologies. Yeah, very much, again, depends on the trip and the nature of the trip, about the most suitably qualified adult for the leader of that trip, or the adults that actually accompany the young people. So it will depend on the nature of the trip and the purpose of the trip, depending on who the adult actually is.
Thank you. And in terms of the youth services as opposed to schools, I think there's a point on that one as well.
Yeah, so it's the same scenario. Again, it would just be dependent on what the nature and the purpose of the trip is, depending on whether it would be a teacher or another suitably qualified and trained adult.
Thanks. Sean, does that cover off the points you were raising there?
Yeah, thanks.
Apologies, Councillor Marshall. Councillor Hagman.
Thank you. Thanks, Chair. Yeah, so I'm reading the report, and I'm really aware that it's set out in the going out there framework, which includes all activities outside schools, but we're specifically looking at overseas. And hopefully I've got that correct from the introduction on page 64. But looking on page 74, it makes reference to the educational benefits, inclusivity and financial viability. And I guess my question ties into this, because it is just given a low priority. And, you know, part of this is, you know, my question's based on experience and the costs of these school trips to young people. Now, I absolutely accept there's huge benefits for our young people. You know, the Douglas Stewart High School went out to CERN to study, you know, look at the Hadron Collider. I mean, it was an incredible opportunity for our young people. I know one of those young people has gone off to study something incredible at university. So, you know, there's clearly huge benefits, but how are we ensuring that those who cannot afford the costs are actually being covered? You know, it might not be a key point of this because we're looking at the framework and tick boxing, but actually, how do we ensure that, you know, that remains achievable for all our young learners and nobody is left behind as a result of just simply not being able to afford the costs of such an incredible opportunity? Thanks.
Thanks, Councillor Hagman. So I think, John, this might be best at your desk.
Yeah, absolutely, and it's a really good question, Councillor Hagman, and fundamentally that should be the starting point for any planning phase, for any trips that are being taken place from our schools, that there needs to be that element of the ability for all young people to participate in that, that within that range, depending on what the activities actually are. So when we are talking to our schools and our head teachers, that is very much fundamental about that comprehensive approach to the availability of the excursion experience for all our young people. And schools have got an imperative and a moral imperative to consider those factors when planning those trips. And that will be in relation to inclusivity, it will be in relation to the cost and the cost of the school day as part of that as well. So it fundamentally sits as a kind of cornerstone of decision making when schools are planning those trips. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Hagman, did you want to come back on that?
Yeah, no, I think that's really helpful. And in terms of the framework, is that captured in here? And is there, you know, in terms of the audit process, have we looked back at where we've done overseas trips, and can we demonstrate that there was no barriers to young people going forward? Has that been looked at, or has that not been part of this audit process? Thanks.
Thanks, Councillor Hagman. So I don't know if this ties in more to the scope of the audit or to what the guidelines, how the guidelines arose in the first place, which is maybe a slightly different thing. So Richard, I'll pass to you first, and then John, if you want to add any comment later.
The audit refers majority to the guidelines that were in place. However, we did look at 10 or 11 individual trips. And we did find good practice examples where fundraising was able to support some pupils, and also pupil equity funding was used on one occasion to support a pupil who didn't have the resources to go otherwise. But again, I'm happy to defer to John on this.
Thanks, Richard. John?
I think just what Richard said, you know, the scope didn't necessarily pick up on all of those aspects, because this was about the risks that were clear and present, and how we address some of those risks, which I think we have done really well with through working together. But that's a wider discussion, I suppose, regarding how we continue to support our schools to make those decisions as effectively as we can. And as Richard's alluded to, there were some good examples of good practice out there that we clearly want to share further as well. Thank you.
Thanks, John. Okay, I don't see any further hands up on this one, so if we can move then to Appendix 2. And again, Richard, do you want to say a few words just at the start of this before going to members' questions?
Thank you, Chair. This is an important audit as it ensures all the relevant staff in the Council have the appropriate checks in place. This was a very thorough piece of work, and although there have been exceptions found, they're very small in number relative to the number of employees who are having these checks in place. So it's a good assurance overall. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. So this is page 77, Protection of Vulnerable Groups Scheme, Appendix 2. So Councillor Sean Marshall first, then Councillor Beretti in the room.
Just in relation to item 2 on page 81, which is regards to a corporate list as maintained of posts which have been assessed as regulated roles. And I think it says in the comments that it would be put into the, a PVG requirement would be included in job adverts. I just want to ask the question, where does it stand, or did they look at elected members? Because we work with vulnerable groups and vulnerable individuals as part of our role, but we don't actually get employed, or we don't actually, through HR. We do after we've been elected, but was that role looked at? Because I think we've raised it as a group before, just amongst ourselves, whether or not, what the process is for elected members and whether we require PVG.
The honest answer is no, it wasn't looked at because I didn't consider it would be an issue. My apologies, Chair.
Okay, well, I suppose it's a direct answer. Sorry, Vlad, did you want to come in on that one?
Through yourself, Chair, happy to look into that and come back to members on that rather than that being part of this kind of particular audit report. But certainly something I think is a very valid question. However, just to be clear, in terms of the PVG scheme's got a very strict kind of criteria in terms of doing regulated work, and therefore it's probably the case that you don't tick the box for that, so you would be regulated as such. But I'll check that in case I'm out of touch with it and come back to members on it.
Thanks, Vlad. I know it has been a subject over the years from members about what their PVG status was, for example, if they were on Social Work Services Committee or Education and Skills and Wellbeing as it is now, but so that might be something that's of interest to all councillors, so that would be helpful. Does that assist in this case, Councillor Marshall?
Yeah, I welcome it being further looked at because it has caused questions in the past, and obviously anyone can put themselves forward to be elected.
Thank you. So, Councillor Beretti?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Closest I can come to this is page 88 on point 9, where an action. And my question it's pretty much similar to Councillor Marshall, but it involves other external bodies that say, for instance, provide volunteer services where they're dealing with schools or where they need to have a PVG. And I've got experience of groups that I've been in that when that group checks with the PVG scheme, they're told one thing, and then when they check with the council, they're told another thing. So is there a joined up thinking here? Because quite often the volunteers are, we or the organisations cannot check the history of their volunteers.
Thanks. And Vlad, I know you've maybe got an interest in speaking to this one. So.
Yes, thank you, Chair. In terms of, it's probably, there's a number of ways that obviously we will get volunteers, and I take Councillor Beretti's point that some of these are with other groups that are external to ourselves, and they may well be providing some form of service, if we call it that, to the council, maybe potentially through schools. It is up to each relevant organisation to ensure that the relevant PVG schemes are carried out for their own volunteers, and I've personally been party to that in terms of volunteering roles that I've had in the past. But the responsibility is with that relevant organisation. If it's council volunteers, then the responsibility falls on us to ensure that anyone who is doing that sort of regulated work, it's put through the scheme, and that's what we tend to do at our end. However, in terms of the kind of example that you gave of potentially schools and volunteers that may come into that, again, it's for each single head teacher and the education department to assure themselves of anyone entering into their premises that if required, they have the relevant regulated work type allowance through the PVG scheme. Now, that might not be the case again because the criteria is quite a high threshold for the actual PVG scheme. We're not talking overall disclosures here, we're talking about the PVG scheme, and the PVG scheme is very specific as to what's required within it. And in essence, to give you an example, is not just coming into a classroom, but actually coming into a classroom possibly on your own as the only adult in the room. And therefore that might mean that you will require the relevant PVG scheme. So a teacher, for example, would require to have that, but you wouldn't necessarily require that if you're coming in as a volunteer to give a presentation to a class where in actual fact there'll always be somebody else present, which already means that that threshold might not be met. So it is very clear criteria within the PVG scheme, but in terms of that joined up thinking, we are constantly in discussions with the Schools of Scotland in terms of obviously the application of PVG scheme, notifications and so on that they've come to us on, but equally that ongoing conversation as and when it comes to through HR or through legal from the relevant services of do we require it, and then we can have that conversation with them, and that's where the joint up thinking would come from. But in essence, there is a number of routes obviously that people might need to have PVG scheme, and they might need it for one role but not another. So again, you might need it for one role in terms of your employment, but you might not require it in terms of volunteering, depending on what it is, and it all comes down to that threshold and criteria being met.
That's pretty comprehensive. Is all that captured on any of our websites?
Yes, sorry, all of that, the actual PVG scheme and the Schools of Scotland have got, in essence, set out really good guidance as to how that all pans out. But the point about the organisations themselves having to do it, that's really important. And the reason for that is that they are the ones that are in control of that volunteer, and that's why it's important that they themselves apply for that volunteer, for the PVG scheme, if they meet the criteria, because thereafter the Schools of Scotland will notify the organisation, that relevant organisation, of anything that's untoward or anything that they should watch out for that particular person. So it's really important that those groups understand that, but all of that's in the Schools of Scotland website.
So I have Stuart Clanahan wanting to come in on this as well. Stuart.
Thank you. Through you, Chair. Yeah, absolutely. Just to, again, provide that assurance that our own policy framework, which we've identified some improvements, some minor improvements through our partnership working there with Audit, and we'll do that, but we're very clear one about the duty to consider rests with the organisation, and there's also clear reference around the rules regarding volunteers as well, and there is a very strict criteria as to whether or not they're required to have a PVG in place. So happy to give that assurance as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so I don't see any other hands up, but just on that point in terms of page 88 and actions 9 and 10, so this does kind of relate to what's been spoken about earlier about that. I suppose the corporate volunteer register could be considered, but you did speak earlier about, you know, it might be for each school to keep a record of their volunteers in relation to their undertakings, and then that has to be checked against Disclosure Scotland or, you know, those members. So I suppose there's a question of, well, how do we know corporately what each, do we have to then check with each school? So it's maybe just a little bit teasing out that relationship there, if you could maybe assist with that.
Yes, thank you. What the system that we've got in place is that there are different registers, absolutely, and I think that's appropriate because, for example, our kind of iTrend system doesn't necessarily have all the volunteers in it. It's more about staff, and thereafter you've got the relevant registers for volunteers within the relevant services. The important thing for us corporately is, and for members' assurance, is that in essence those lists are kept up to date at that level, and where, as and when we're required to tap into that, we can, and we've set up the processes for that. So I am the ultimate kind of signatory for PVG, for the authority, and in essence the Scotia Scotland will let me know, and literally on a weekly basis, if they are potentially investigating somebody, or whether somebody is in terms of raising any flags for us in terms of their regulated work. So that ongoing conversation with the Scotia Scotland is set up. Then the next stage is, the first question I would ask is, I would go to the gatekeepers of those registers, and at that point I have a need to know, and that need to know is where I would ask, do you have any volunteers with this name, with this address, etc., that allows them to come back and say yes or no to that. And if they do, obviously then I would give that information straight back to the Scotia Scotland and explain exactly what their role is that they're carrying out.
Thank you. And Richard, did you want to add anything to that?
No, thank you, Chair. I'll defer to Vlad on this one.
Thank you. So, Councillor Hagman.
Yeah, thanks, Chair, for letting me come in on that. It was just really in response to what Vlad was saying, and thinking about the earlier questions on this about elected members. So, Vlad, thank you. You've clearly set out when you would be notified of anything from Disclosure Scotland regarding PVC checks. But is there a similar issue if the Standards Commission are investigating? Are you informed? Is the council informed? And I appreciate this is not a subject that MD really wants to highlight, but there are occasions, and it's been noted nationally, there has been times where elected members have been subject to police inquiry for various reasons. But are you notified at that point, and is there any action that could be taken forward in that space? As I say, it's not really related to this, but just building on the previous question and you being notified, does that come to the Standards Commission? Thanks.
Through yourself, Chair. Not part of this audit, again, just to clarify that point, but I can give context for Councillor Hagman's question. So the answer is, it's not the Standards Commissioner, it would be the Ethical Standards Commissioner that would inform myself as a monitoring officer of the Council if there are any investigations that are ongoing for any elected member through obviously the Code of Conduct matters which come to their attention, and then thereafter we've got obviously if it's referred by the Ethical Standards Commissioner to the Standards Commission thereafter for a decision on that.
Thanks for that particular answer. But with that, there's no further questions on this one. So if we move then on to Appendix 3. So I'll just get my pages here. And Richard, did you want to come in and just say a couple of introductory words on this? Oh, sorry, I beg your pardon, Councillor Dryborough.
That's okay, Chair. I'll wait, and then Richard, if he's got something to say.
Okay, so on Appendix 3, Richard, did you want to say a few things at the start?
Thank you, Chair. It's just to clarify that school funds are not technically council funds. They actually belong to the parents. However, we do have a duty of care towards these funds. And within secondary schools in particular, there are some quite large sums involved. Members will be aware that we have previously done a review of nursery finances on a similar topic, the difference being the scale of the funds held by nurseries relatively to secondary schools. The other thing, very pragmatically to say, is that members will be aware from reading the report that we didn't get a full response from all schools. I took the pragmatic decision that I wish to bring a report before members at this meeting. We will, however, do a very thorough follow-up when all schools will be involved, and we'll provide that assurance to yourselves in due course. Thank you, Chair.
That's helpful. Thank you, Richard. Councillor Drybra.
Yeah, thanks for allowing that to happen, Chair, because Richard just answered my question. Cheers.
Brilliant. Well done. So any other members on this? Councillor Beretti.
Thank you, Chair. No, I think Richard's probably also answered, because I noticed on page 95 and his comment, I think related to that not every school had the records, and it seems to be that there are probably 4 means of recording things, which doesn't seem exactly a very joined up process, but I'd be welcome Richard's points on how it might all be sorted.
So over to you, Richard.
Thank you, Chair. As you'll be aware, it's obviously for management to put arrangements in place for me to consider the adequacy of those arrangements. We did, however, notice good practice within some secondary schools. One particular system has been used as a database to record school fund expenditure. That would seem to be one solution, but again, it's up to management to consider the pros and cons and the costs. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you. I don't see any further questions on this item. Obviously, we've had the update from Richard that reports will come back in 6 months or so in due course in terms of each of these to see how they've progressed. But with that, if we go to the recommendations, so we've been asked to note and comment on the finalised internal audit reports, appendices 1 to 3. Are we happy to agree that we've done that? Okay, thank you. I've got a wee note here from Claire just saying lunch is here circled, but I'm conscious that the last 2 items might not be too meaty, so I'm in the hands of members, but with your indulgence I'll just press on if that's okay. Okay, so item 9 is scrutiny reviews for 2024-25. We've got Fraser, Davis and Charles Rocks here. If members have any questions, Fraser or Charles, do you have any comments you want to add before we open to members?
Nothing at this stage, Chair, but happy to take questions from members.
Thank you. So, I mean, it's set out as it is, but Councillor Dryborough? Councillor Dryborough, sorry, I can't hear you, so I don't know if there's a wee issue with your audio.
No.
I think you're on mute just now.
Sorry, have you got me now?
That's it, yes.
Yeah, sorry about that, Chair. It's just to say that I think we've discussed this before, looking at any scrutiny reviews that we would look to take in here, and these were a couple of them that we thought would be good to get a scrutiny review on, and happy to agree the recommendations on them.
Thanks, Councillor Dryborough. I don't see any other hands up, and with that, happy to go forward on that basis. So, are we happy to basically agree that is the way forward? Consider and agree the scrutiny reviews? Okay, thank you. That takes us on to item 10, which is the Council Health and Safety Update Report. We've got Stuart Clanahan still online and Sue Hawkin-Pethick here to assist members if they have any questions. Do you want to add anything before opening up to elected members?
From my perspective, nothing to add, Chair. Happy to take any questions. Sue and I are here for those. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And Sue, I'm not sure if I can see you on screen, but if is there anything you'd like to add?
I'm happy to take any questions as officers if they want to. I think the biggest commitment and project that we've got is the purchase of a health and safety portal, which will most certainly help with board incidents and also action and performance going forward.
Okay, thank you. I think you broke up a little bit there in the audio, so it was to do with the health and safety portal. So I don't know if you could repeat that bit just for the benefit of members, please.
Yeah, it's an exciting opportunity and investment for senior management for a health and safety portal that's been purchased, and we've been progressing development of forms. Basically, it's to look at instant reporting, asset management, and for audit inspection and action management. So it's certainly a health and safety management system that will certainly help us going forward.
Okay, thanks, Sue. That's helpful. So we've got Councillor Dryborough and then Councillor Hagman.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. And again, it's just about the concerns about staff absences over the last number of months, and considering we've had a health and wellbeing group looking at how we improve the opportunities for members of our employees to get back to work as soon as possible. I'm just wondering how we are with that at the moment, where we are with the different projects ongoing to try and get staff back to work as soon as possible.
Okay, I think maybe, does that go to Stuart first, perhaps?
Happy to come in on this. This was a responsibility for HR up until the 1st of April, and that's now transferred over to colleagues within the organisational development team. However, given my sort of close working knowledge and working with members on these matters, I think it's fair to report that we continue to see real push within that health and wellbeing programme. We all understand through the Strategic Health and Wellbeing Group that prevention is better than cure. And we now have those significant activities in place. We have lots of support for staff in place to support that better work-life balance. And in addition to that, looking at absence management information, which is part of the puzzle in terms of looking at absence and well-being. We regularly monitor and review absence cases. We have rolled out a digital dashboard for senior managers to review absence data on a daily basis, so they have very good intel about absence information within services, and that's regularly scrutinised by HR and provides that assurance around that data. I've also have an HR team who provides advice, support and guidance to both staff and managers around how to resolve long-term absence cases and, of course, bring people back to work sooner rather than later. All of which, of course, is underpinned by that prevention is better than cure aspect, which is really important and heavily signalled through our wellbeing campaigns. Thank you.
Thanks, Stuart. Sue, did you want to add anything to that from your perspective?
Fine, thank you.
Okay, thanks. So hopefully that answers your question, Councillor Dryborough.
It does, Chair, thanks.
Okay, Councillor Hagman.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, so I appreciate the report on this, and can I just confirm, is this an annual report that we get, and is it going to remain within audit, risk and scrutiny? I'm trying to follow through on where we are with the numbers and what it means, because while the table 1 on page 115 is interesting, it doesn't tell me, it's just numbers. It doesn't relate it to, are we doing better than last year? Are we doing worse than last year? What's the national average? It goes back to that sort of local government benchmarking at the very start. Where do we sit nationally with some of this in order for us to be able to determine, is this a good report or not a good report, if that makes sense? Certainly over the page on page 118, there's more information there, which is helpful, and we have got the various years, and certainly looking at work-related stress, those figures have gone down, which is absolutely to be welcomed. And I'm aware that the council are doing a lot of work in supporting staff, etc. So again, where are we sitting in terms of a percentage of our whole workforce in comparison to other local authorities? It would be maybe useful to get more information going forward. So while I'm not necessarily needing any information right now, if this is going to be an annual report, can we capture maybe some of the wider parameters that we're working within and what it actually means for future reporting? Thank you.
Thank you. So presumably this might be one for Sue, and I'm just wondering, is it maybe just contextual information? So it's like, do we have enough of the right trained staff and whatever thing, or, you know, are we working towards a target, etc.? So there's maybe a wee bit of that contextual information. So I'll Sue and then Stuart, I think, for this one.
Yeah, sure. With the
So apologies, Sue. I've been asked by IT support here if you could turn your camera off.
For health and safety training.
Sorry, you were breaking up a bit there. Would you be able to turn your camera off and try that response again, please, just to save on the bandwidth? Thank you.
Yes. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, okay so far, yes.
Okay. Yes, the since purchasing the lifelong learning platform by organisational development, we have been having discussions about what improved effectiveness of intel that we could get out of the system, because absolutely we need to identify baseline mandatory requirements that we've been pursuing through with lifelong learning centre partners, because obviously until we can establish that baseline for sure on what the need is, to then see, right, well, has that training then be delivered? And I do appreciate that just numbers on a page is probably not the most helpful, but we are certainly looking at, so next year when we do the report, absolutely we can review the hopefully can be able to provide you increased intel on that. I don't know if Stuart wanted to add anything on that one.
Yeah, thanks, Sue. Stuart?
Yeah, thanks. Through you, Chair. You know, absolutely, there is some crossover with some of the information within this report, as well as a workforce establishment report, which we normally report round about November time. So appreciate the question. And I think it's absolutely appropriate that we will consider that kind of broader, wider context, where we can look to provide a bit more trend analysis. And also where we can provide a bit more of that comparator information, looking at other council performance. And I think, as Councillor Hagman recognised, the work-related stress figures. I mean, if we take, you know, the COVID period out of it as a bit of an outlier, it's the lowest work-related stress figures in 6 years, and there is a lot of work going on in all areas of the organisation in terms of supporting our staff, and certainly HR working with the trade unions. We developed a new procedure in 2021 and early 2022, which was designed to simplify and to support, and you know, we'd like to think that that's where at least part of the benefit, but certainly we're in a better trend analysis than we have been, with not only work-related stress but general absence. But happy to provide that kind of broader context in future reports. Thank you.
Thank you. So Councillor Hagman, does that help give you that assurance that we'll have that contextual information as we go forward?
Yeah. Yep, no, thank you, Chair. Thanks for the answers.
Okay, thank you. So Councillor Bretty?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Page 111.47, and it relates to, in one part of it, the review of health and safety training provisions. Given that we've got a lot of assets, and a lot of our assets also have public interface, so that you can imagine a few that we have, swimming pools, centres, we often have turnaround of staff, young staff in particular. Now, is there either a start or a training process whereby we know that when new members of staff come in, that they follow good guidelines, or that they are trained to the degree that when an incident happens, they know exactly what to do, rather than trying to find someone who can actually tell them what to do? I don't know if that would help, Sue.
Yeah, there is. The council do have an induction checklist that all managers need to use for regarding organisational health and safety arrangements, but also locally they're required to. On the checklist includes, for example, what are the local incident reporting requirements and local risk assessments and safe working procedures, you know, for which they need to cover as well. and indeed, depending on the service, the unproportionate risks, what that induction locally does actually look like. But yes, it is included as part of the induction for local safety arrangements as well for the actual build, relevant to the actual building as well.
Thanks. Sue, does that give you the assurance, Councillor Beretti?
I think it does. I would like to obviously look at that through the other portal that we have access to, which we do every so months, and I think the next one is December. There is one question that I don't know where it's to ask here or not. Every single, and this is something that has occurred to me of late, every single asset that we have has obviously a postcode. But if when a person has to respond, let's say for instance to an emergency, a 999, and they give a postcode and the person at the other end gets it wrong, what happens? Because I know that there are two systems involved. One is you just try and give your postcode, or the other one is you give what 3 words. Now I've looked at what 3 words, and quite often what 3 words can be very accurate, but if the person at the other end gets it wrong or doesn't understand, then that can actually have implications when there is a serious incident and an ambulance has to be called.
Okay, I think I'll let Vlad come in to address that one, Councillor Beretti.
Thank you, Chair. I'm happy to have a chat offline, probably more appropriate because it's not necessarily relevant to this particular paper, but I can speak on my past life, having worked with emergency services.
I'm happy to take that, and I'll even provide a cup of tea.
Okay, thank you. With that, there's no further questions from members just now, so I think if we're comfortable, we'll go to the recommendations. Are we happy to agree that we've reviewed the overall summary of activities, reviewed the key health and safety operational support activities, and reviewed the work-related incident and ill health absence data? Okay, thank you. So thanks very much, everybody, for your participation today. Item 11 is any other business deemed urgent. I have not been notified of any urgent business. So with that, thanks everybody for your participation, and that's the end of the meeting. Thank you.